Welcome to the Bloom Where You're Planted podcast from Never Too Late Cafe. I'm your host, Laura Womack. Each week, we sit down for a chat with someone just like you, someone who had an idea, a passion, a dream, or sometimes just a thought, and planted that seed, watched it grow into something they wanted to share with the world. If you have an idea for a topic or someone that would be a guest for the Bloom Where You're Planted podcast, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, where you can join our Never Too Late Cafe Facebook group. We'd love to hear from you. Hello, everyone. I have with me today as a special guest, Tony Acree, and I'm going to have him say hi and tell you a little bit about himself and where he's from.
Hi, folks. My name is Tony Acree. I'm a novelist, publisher, and screenwriter. I'm the author of the Victor McCain thrillers, co-author of the Samantha Tyler thrillers. I'm also the owner of Hydra Publications. We won several awards for Publisher of the Year. And then I'm also a screenwriter. My first solo screenplay, Songs of Bloody Harlan, about the life of former Kentucky Poet Laureate and three-time Pulitzer nominee Lee Pittington. It's a story about his time teaching in Harlan County, Kentucky in 1967. So I kind of run the gamut of the publishing world.
So can you take us back on how your journey started, how you started your interest and obviously a passion because you're doing several things in this field. So how did it all begin for you?
Well, it's interesting because when I was in grade school, first grade, I had a reading disability. If I read C tip, kick the ball, C tip, catch the ball, C tip, throw the ball, and then you asked me what was I reading, there was no reading comprehension. I didn't remember any of it. And Mrs. Seals worked with me every day, was a teacher every day after school. In my third grade, I was reading on the sixth grade level. And by sixth grade, I was reading on the college level, but I couldn't spell college. I had a reading disability. I mean, spelling for me was atrocious. And I can still remember the embarrassment of my sixth grade teacher saying, "You've got almost a college level vocabulary, but you can't spell cat. What's wrong with you?" And so despite the fact I love to write, I wrote poetry in high school. They used one of my poems for a memorial page for seniors that passed away in the yearbook. But I never tried to be professionally published because I couldn't spell. And then in my mid-30s, I went back to get my computer degree in computer science. And my last class was English 102 because it was the last class of my degree because they took in-class writing prompts and they took off for spelling. And it just terrified me that was going to happen. And my professor let me use an electronic dictionary. And 2 weeks in the class, he had me stay after, and he said, "I can't let you use it anymore." And when I started to complain, he said, "You don't understand. I'm taking off spelling for everybody else. I'm not taking it off for you. You're an excellent writer, but you're not writing. You're looking words up." And at the end of the semester, everybody else had to write a letter to the editor. And then he pointed at me and said, "Except for you, I've marked up a portion of your writing journal that you need to turn into a short story, and you don't get a grade till I see a return receipt where you've sent it someplace to be published." And I'm like, well, okay. So I did it. Kentucky Monthly Magazine put the short story in their Kentucky Derby issue. And he was the one that forced me to be published and convinced me that that's why they created the word editor and proofreader. Somebody else can make your work look pretty. You're a good idea guy. Get the idea on paper. And then when I was president of the Friends of the Oldham County Library, I'd been writing short stories and magazine articles and that kind of stuff. Lynn Tincher, who I now publish actually, gave a talk about there was going to be an event called Pitch the Publisher LaGrange, where you could pitch your story idea to 3 different publishers, and you got 15 minutes of feedback, and they would tell you whether they're going to sign you. So I said, why not? I got a couple ideas. So I pitched 2 ideas to the 3 publishers, and all 3 offered to publish both stories. Ended up signing with Otherworld, and then unfortunately that was run by Lynn Tincher. She had a health issue that made her get out of the publishing business. I got picked up by Hydra Publications, and within a year, the gentleman decided to get out of the business, so I bought the company. I've now owned it for close to 9 years, and we've got about 160 writers under contract. And that's kind of how my first book came out, hit #1 on Amazon, their horror charts, and I was off to the races. And then, here recently, I just signed a contract with Dark Harbor Pictures, which is a division of Element Media Group. They're going to do 2 streaming shows based on my books. And they're also going to do 2 graphic novels, one for each of the 2 main characters.
Wow. So is your genre horror?
It is, although I'm also writing a private detective series. I actually prefer those over supernatural. I'm a fan of Lee Child and John Sanford and Michael Connelly, Bosch and the Reacher series on TV. That's what I would like to write. But when I pitched the 2 ideas, and it was a good thing they did this, I said, which book do you want first, the PI novel or the supernatural? And they said, well, supernatural sells. We want that first, which was a good thing because now that's going to put my kids through college. So people love anything occult, supernatural, and they're adult thrillers. While they have a horror component, they're basically just fast-paced, dark humor adult thrillers.
That is so popular now, the zombie, the gore, the horror things.
I don't have as much gore in my books, although there's a lot of, there's a lot of, it's my wife said, are you writing today? Yes. Do you have to kill anybody in this chapter? Well, duh. Yeah. People die and things die a lot, but I don't go into really gory detail about it. I use more as much the psychological thriller part of it and whatnot. So.
Oh, you keep people on the edge.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how you got started writing, and you took over Hydra. So how did he select you? Were you being published by him?
Frank Hall owned it at the time. He was one of the 3 publishers I pitched to. And then when Lynn, that just shows you how you have to have some perseverance. When I signed with Lynn, she let me know my book, this was midsummer. And she said, by the way, I'm going to release your book in November, but I'm closing down December 31st. So your book will only be out for 2 months. And then I'll have to withdraw it. Because again, she was retiring for health issues. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do? And then the 2 other people I pitched to both contacted me the next day and offered me a contract. Hydra's contract was just better. And so I signed with them. And that's why, again, a year later, he got involved in a lot of Magic the Gathering tournaments. He owned a game store. And he decided he was no longer going to publish any new books. He was going to leave the old books up. But that meant that when I wrote book number 2, I was going to have to find another publisher. And quite frankly, I tried to convince somebody else to buy the company. I didn't want to be a publisher. But after 3 or 4 people saying no, I went, well, at least I'll get my rights back. So I bought the company. And then I had an offer 2 years ago to sell it for 6 figures. So, we've made it into a very successful small press.
So you already had existing clients and authors that you were representing. So did you get some inside scoop, some training, how to be a publisher? Because it's obviously different than being a writer or an editor.
For sure. And what happened was when Frank Hall still owned Hydra, I went to my first convention up in Ohio, and there were a lot of small presses there. And then I knew Frank was going to need some help. So I went to Steven Zimmer of 7 Star Press. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a quick blank. Jason Sizemore of Apex. And then James O. Barnes of Locandale Press and said, if you all will I will pay for dinner for the 3 of you if you let me pick your brain while we're at dinner. So let me pay for dinner, take you to dinner, and then I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. And they were very generous with their time, which is one of the things I like about this part of the country here in the Louisville metro area, Louisville, Cincinnati, Lexington. There's a great community of writers, and they really are supportive. So I asked things like, okay, how many books a year should you release? Okay, what's your budget for each book? How do you do your editing? How do you do your promotions? And so by the time I decided to take over the press, I was well versed in what to do and what not to do. And I took all their suggestions to heart. Because again, I remember the company had lost money several years in a row. And my very first year, I made $700 in profit and thought I was king of the world because I actually turned a profit. And again, we go to the point where just a couple of years ago, somebody offered me 6 figures to buy it. So networking and bugging people, I tell all my writers and anybody in this business, if you meet somebody who has knowledge you need, don't be afraid to ask them, because most cases, they're going to be willing to tell you and to help you out. And if they tell you no, you're no worse off. So it's like, hey, Laura, you do podcasts. Can I talk to you about how do you set that up? Then one of these days, because we're getting ready to start doing a podcast. So it's like, do you do Zoom? Do you use this? Do you use that? And so that's one of those cases where when you meet creative people who are in this business, bug them. Don't be afraid to ask, and then take good notes. That's another thing to do, take good notes.
Well, I can say that I met you last year at the Imaginarium, and it was an environment that honestly just feeds my spirit because, there was people that did artwork for book covers and illustrations and publishers and authors and screenplay writers. So it's a film festival as well. And just so many, I just felt like I came back floating because it was in a world I just really love. So I never thought at the time that we would have the opportunity to actually sit down and talk like this. So it's exciting for me. So thank you for being a guest.
Well, no worries. Let's point out to your podcast listeners that Imaginarium, which is held in Louisville, Kentucky, it'll be July 8th, 9th, and 10th this year. You can find them at entertheimaginarium.com. I'm the Toastmaster for the event. I have been for the last 5 or 6 years. So if you're, and that's the perfect point. If you're looking to network, which is very important in our business, things like Imaginarium are excellent to attend for just that reason. Because they have cover artists, they've got editors, and we do pitch the publisher events. You can actually bring your stories and pitch them to several different publishers while you're there. And I gave a talk at Spalding University to their online publication class today. And that's the point I meant is, network. That's what this is all about, making connections and then using those connections to help your career, because what you know is good, who you know is better. And because you could be you can have the greatest book in the world, but if you don't know how to get it in the hands of a reader, it doesn't do any good. So I've seen. Well, look at 50 Shades of Grey. I mean, that's, and all due respect, it's not a very well written book. There are websites devoted to the grammar problems in this book, but it got to the right people, and it's one of the best-selling books of the last 20 years. So, it was getting to the right people, getting the right eyeballs on it, and getting it presented and getting it out. So that's why things like Imaginarium are very important.
So Imaginarium also, just to go back to that for a second, has it like a conference room where there's tables and vendors set up. So it does have where you can go and meet other people. And it did have a very open and welcoming environment. So if anyone were to explore that world, they would feel very welcome. I can say that. So, so how did you come to be interested in Lee Pennington's story to be able to do? Lee Pennington's a writer, and he had a very interesting experience as a teacher. And this was what, the 60s?
67. He was in Harlan County in mid to late 60s. I started out as a poet in high school. I can't write poetry anymore. It all comes out as prose. But I started out as a poet, and I've always had a soft spot for poets. So several years ago, I decided to start a poetry imprint, even if it didn't make money. I didn't care. I just wanted to give a home to poets. And then Arlen Andrews introduced me to Lee. And Lee was looking for a publisher for his newest work and to republish some of his older work. We got to talking, we hit it off, and I became Lee's publisher. We republished He Knew a Woman, and then his first book of poetry that was just his alone, Segovia's Fingernail, we released that last year. And I throw a big Christmas party for all my writers, and we're just sitting there chewing the fat. And it's me and Lee and a bunch of the guys sitting at the table, and we got talking about his time in Harlan. And it's just a fascinating story. And just briefly for the people listening to the podcast, in 1967, he went with his wife to Harlan in Cumberland, the town of Cumberland. And at the community college, they wanted to write about Paris and New York and places they had never been. And Lee said, no, I want you to write about Harlan. And they said, sir, nothing happens in Harlan. He goes, all kinds of things happen in Harlan. they took him to heart. And then later that semester, when the class released their book of poetry, some of the locals took out a contract to have Lee murdered because they, you had things like the sheriff being outed for having a kid out of wedlock and the coal company for dumping chemicals in the river. And this is during the Vietnam War. So there were anti-Vietnam poems, anti-God poems. And, it just really hit the community. And he had to teach with a 357 in his briefcase. And then had to leave town because they got a call from the head of the community college system saying that there was an assassin. The attorney general got a tip. There was an assassin coming to Harlan to kill Lee, and he needed to get out of town. He slept in a different house every couple of nights for 30 days. And while he's telling the story, I'm thinking, and I just written my first screenplay with another friend to teach me how to the formatting of a screenplay. And I was looking for something to be my first solo. I'm like, Lee, you got to let me write a screenplay about that. And he said, have at it. And then this was in December, and 2 months later, a group out of Chicago contacted Lee. They had seen a documentary about him, said, we want to do a movie, feature film about your time in Harlan. And they came to an agreement, and then they said, we're going to find somebody to write the screenplay. He introduced me. I went through some interviews, showed him my previous work, and then I got hired to write the screenplay. And then what we're talking about Imaginarium, Songs of Bloody Harlan took first place in their long screenplay format for Best Feature Film Screenplay 2 years ago. And now it's going to be out as a feature film. So that's kind of, we're at a Christmas party, just telling stories. And, Lee is a fantastic storyteller. He comes from a long
we know.
Yes, we know. And Lee's just a fabulous guy. And, but I mean, you can't make that story up. So when I accepted the award for Best Screenplay, I said, I really can't take much credit. All the credit's got to go to Lee, because this is a story you just wrote what happened and you're done. Now granted, I had to do some work with it, but all the elements were there: trauma, romance, intrigue, action, danger. It had everything you'd ever want as a screenwriter.
Well, I think I shared earlier that Lee is a relative, and I remember, and when you're a kid hearing things, they're not always accurate, but I remember hearing that he had to leave town in the middle of the night because of one of his books. So that obviously was the truth.
It was a collection of poetry called People of Tomorrow that his class put out. It was 13 poems, or 13 people, I think. I can't remember if it was 13 poems, but at least 13 people. They picked the best poetry from that class and then published it. And then they were selling it for $1 a book. And when the book hit the local community, it just set it on fire. And the preacher wasn't happy with him. All the churches were talking about trying to get the book banned. And he took a lot of heat, but then again, it was a threat to his life that forced him out of town. So, it is funny. I talked to several people from there as research for this. They didn't know Lee, but they live in that part of the world. And one of the people said he deserved to be shot. You don't put mountain business out in public. By God, he deserved to be shot. And if he comes back now, they still ought to shoot him. I mean, she was viscerally angry about something that happened in 1967 because he broke the mountain code. Mountain stories, things stay with the people. You don't put it out, the dirty laundry out in public. And I remember he told another story where he went back in the mid-90s to tell anybody was coming, went to go visit a friend. He hadn't been there 30 minutes. The friend got a call and said, was that Lee Pennington that just walked into your house? And the guy goes, and if it is, tell him he's got to leave. They're getting a group together to come get him. And so, he had ended up leaving town right then. So this is 20 some odd years later. He doesn't announce it. Someone just sees him and they're going to come string him up. So,
my
don't
word.
mess with mountain people.
It sounds funny. It reminds me of Harper Valley PTA, the song that came out where, they were talking about all this and that. I don't know, but I don't think that song led to death threats. It was a hit.
Yeah, it was a hit, but that's quite frankly, it's one of the reasons why we likely can't film in Harlan, because we would have issues actually filming the movie in Harlan. So we're going to find someplace else that's like Cumberland to do that.
I never thought of an area that could, like the mountain code. I'd never heard of that before. So that's intriguing. So to to bring us up to date, so what projects are you currently working on?
I'm currently working on the next Victor McCain solo novel. It's called The Unit. It's in my original book, The Hand of God. It's about a bounty hunter named Victor McCain who finds out his only brother sold his soul to the devil, and he's got 24 hours to find a girl that's stolen something that Satan wants back. And the Hand of God is God's bounty hunter that deals that Old Testament justice. And by the end of the first book, my guy's got to be the new Hand of God. That's how he goes on to fight demons and hellhounds and fallen angels and all such of type folks. And in my newest book, The Unit, Victor's he's a Delta soldier, served in Afghanistan. And his unit is getting back together in Kentucky, in Louisville, for a reunion. And of course, things happen that relate back to their time overseas. And this is kind of my homage to the movie The Thing that starred Kurt Russell and Keith David. And it's been a lot of fun to write. And that'll be out later this year. And then my daughter, Lauren Acree, who's also is becoming a screenwriter. We've pitched one of her story ideas to both the people in Chicago and the people in LA, and they both loved it. So in the next couple of weeks, Lauren and I are going to finish her first screenplay. So I'm teaching her how to write one. And she's already got 2 studios interested in buying it. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. So another novel, another screenplay, and then I've got another screenplay to write after that one. So my girls just graduated high school. They're on their way to the University of Kentucky to further their education, which means Dad now has more time to write, which is a good thing.
Wow, you're busy. And so how do people find out about Hydra publications is it word of mouth? Do you put it out there that do you do events?
Well, this is what's great. This is a good learning experience for anybody who wants to get in this business. Everything we're a sponsor of Imaginarium. We've got a website, hydrapublications.com. Please stop by and visit it. We do social networking. We go to conventions. And so we do Facebook ads. We do Amazon ads. So if you're going to survive in the publishing world in today's climate, you kind of have to do a little bit of all of it. We do ebooks, we do print books, we do audiobooks. We just released our first hardback, Salt Fork Stations, written by Rock Neely and Sirens of Sally by Jay Erickson. Those are our first 2 hardback books. So we're getting into the hardback realm because that's always been cost prohibitive for independent writers and publishers, but Amazon's made that a little easier. But the main thing is, and then doing interviews like this, I tell my writers, when I first got started, I did over 30 events a year for 4 years in a row. If I was offered a podcast, I did the interview. If I was offered a blog post, I wrote it. If I was offered a book signing, I sat in the chair. You got to approach this like a job. It's just not going to magically, organically happen. You've got to work at it. And I had a 5-year plan. Lee Child is a perfect example. He writes the Jack Reacher novels. There's a fabulous series right now on Amazon Prime based on his books. He said, my first book signing, 2 people showed up and I knew them both. Now they line up around the block. He said, I had a 5-year plan on going from being a TV writer to a novelist, and I worked at it. And I put the time in, and that's what most people have to do. And a lot of people, writing a book is hard enough to begin with. But then once you write it, the work doesn't end. And it's funny because when I first started writing my book, they're like, well, have you started a Twitter account yet? Do you have a blog page? I'm like, well, no. They're like, we need to get on that now and start meeting people and networking with people. So that way, when your book comes out, you've got kind of a following already. And so you really have to do all of it. Social networking is huge. Websites are huge. And then just doing as many interviews as you can. Because Google wants to see that you're busy. There's a very good track athlete in Iowa with my name. And when you Google Tony Acree, you never see his results because the first 10, 15 pages are all stuff that I've done. And because Google, the more active you are, the higher you are in the search quotient. And the more often you update your websites, your Twitter page, and people don't have to write long articles. You can do a short blog post, hey, I was interviewed, on a podcast today. Here's the link to it. I think you're going to like it. And just that update, doing it once or twice a week, Google sees you're active. They don't care what you write. They just want to know that you're writing something. And by being active, it raises your search quotient. And so, if someone goes, Lee Pennington, what's he like? And they go Googling, well, because he's active, Lee shows up everywhere. And that's a big part of being, it's not just writing. You got to do all the other stuff to go along with it.
Right, exactly. My dad had written, it was kind of a late in life, it was a release for him to just, he had ideas and he got them on paper, and um, he was never published while he was living. And my mom and I sought out to put out a book. It was self-published, but that was so many years ago. It was like almost 40 years ago now. So we didn't have the wherewithal to know how to put it out there. And we also had a printer that really kind of butchered up the spelling and printed it that way. It was just, so you're exactly right in that, the plan is wonderful, that where you're wanting to go. And then the networking, that is wonderful words. Because actually that's what I was going, one of our topics is always, words of wisdom. And you've kind of peppered them throughout the whole conversation here. So I call it wow, because someone somewhere is going to listen to this and go, that's what I needed to hear. The direction.
Well, again, it's just, you have to, like, if you want to write, you got to write for 15 minutes every day. No excuses. That keeps you in the groove. It's like exercising your body. It exercises your brain. When I go to Starbucks and I write at Starbucks, because I love my family, but they bug me when I'm writing. And so, but when I lift the lid of Starbucks and put on my headphones, my brain knows it's time to write. And so I'll sit there for 3 or 4 hours and just let it rip. And then you have to treat it as a job. It can be a passion. I mean, I'm going to die doing this. My luck, I'll die over a keyboard. So I'm lucky that I do what I love for a living, but it's still a job. I mean, it's just not going to get, la, 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 and then your book's, woo, it's big. It doesn't happen that way. I mean, once, it's like, and I go back to 50 Shades of Grey, because you started as fan fiction. There's somebody who hit the lottery right out of the gate, right? Well, there's always one lottery winner, but there's 290 million people who also bought tickets that didn't win. And so for the rest of us, we have to work at it. Every now and then you'll get lucky, but if you're listening to this and you want to start a writing career, you're going to have to work at it. It's just not going to, that 1 in a million shots is likely not going to happen, but you can be successful if you're willing to put the time in on it.
Exactly. And your evidence of it. So this is a podcast called Bloom Where You're Planted. And I know you've been Kentucky based. So have you always been from Kentucky?
Hey, I'm born and raised, proud. I even had, when I was in the military, my nickname was Kentucky, because no matter what you had, we had something better. So I love the state of Kentucky. I'm proud to be a Kentuckian. And it's funny because I knew that question was going to be asked. And for me, blooming, it was my local library, because I grew up in a fairly poor family. We couldn't afford to buy books. And I just wore our library out. And not only just books, but they had a music section. I love music, and I could check out the latest album and listen to it. And so I spent, even, long after I could, afford to do other things, I used our local library a lot. And then I got this gig because I was president of the Friends of the Old County Library Association, still involved with my library. And if it wasn't for that, I never would have heard about Pitch the Publisher. I never would have seen my novels, and you and I likely wouldn't be talking. So for me, the place where I bloom was my library, my local library here in Old County. So I give them a lot of credit for that, and that shows that even for communities that have, are affluent and can afford things, libraries are still important for a lot of different people. And so you talk about bloom where you're planted. I bloomed in my library system, and I am a product of being involved with my library for my whole lifetime. So
I love the library. And when I was in high school, I was the nerd in the library. People didn't know who I was. We had little study carols, and that's where I was all the time. And a lot of people, when they really look back, can say that, there was something that grabbed them. And it's nice to know that those things that, a lot of people think that technology is going to out them, like the library system, but I disagree. It's an area that can foster your mind, put it that way.
Sure.
So,
sure.
Tony, I am so glad that we've gotten to talk. I hope to see you again this year at the Imaginarium, and look forward to probably talking to you again sometime, if we may, for some future projects. And
Sure.
I wish you the best on all of your endeavors. You've shared some wonderful words for people that want to do what you have done, and you're very diverse. So that's a
Well,
lot of
and that's
opportunity
important
for
for
people.
writers. Let me add that last thing. Revenue streams is really important if you want to be successful. So having a print book, an ebook, an audio book, writing screenplays, revenue streams are really important for somebody starting out in this business. So that way, if ebook sales tail off, maybe print sales will be good, or if they're not doing as well, audiobooks do well, or you can sell a screenplay. So if you want to be a writer, diversification in what you do and not just being pigeonholed into one format is something you really need to consider.
That's so true, because when you look at different generations of people that are your audience, they have different methods. That is there's still people are the DVD people.
Oh, sure.
And then there's still and then there's, people that want streaming or a Kindle version. So you're exactly right. That's what I think, that, we're at a time where we just have multi-generational audiences. Those are great words to go by. Again, Tony, thanks again. Let's chat again sometime. This is Laura Womack from Never Too Late Cafe saying bye for now.
Goodbye, folks.